Hi, I'm Wes, the Explosion, and the first Kirby game I ever saw was Adventure for the NES, and the first I played was Superstar for the Super Nintendo. Well, no, actually it was Dream Course, but let's not count that. That's not the point anyway. What is that I actually missed the original game, Kirby's Dream Land for the Game Boy, until it was included in a collection for the Wii. It always felt like a huge oversight, given how much I liked the series, so why not give it a deeper look now? That sounds fun and not just a way to throw something together quick during a week where I'm running behind. Not at all. King DDD and his minions have stolen all the food in Dreamland, along with the citizens' treasured sparkling stars, so Kirby sets out to get them back. And that's it. It's not only an old game, but also a small game, so a plot that you can sum up in a single sentence not only fits, but is also kind of expected. Still though, with as gluttonous as Kirby has sometimes been portrayed, there's something almost ironic, or perhaps hypocritical, about him busting down DDD's door for doing the same. Then again, I guess there's a big difference between overeating and stealing, so maybe not. Please eat responsibly, I guess. You can suck things in and spit them out, though with how synonymous Kirby has become with the copy ability, some might be surprised to find out that he didn't always have that power. And yeah, I know what some of you smart Alecs are gonna say, there's plenty of games where he can't copy, but it's pretty much always there for major releases. You're really gonna try to tell me that Mass Attack is mainline? Anyway, Suck and Spit is pretty much your main means of attack, though luckily, most normal enemies can be pulled in. You can also swallow whatever you have in your mouth as well, if that's preferable to firing them off for some reason. You can also fly around indefinitely, and expelling air while puffed up can also hurt smaller baddies. So while falling into pits will kill you, you'd have to make a pretty big blunder for that to happen. No, you'll probably die from taking too much damage, you having 6 health points. For power-ups, there's 1-ups, these little bottle-looking things that refill 2 health, and Maximum, not Maximum tomatoes, which will bring you back to full. Going back to powers though, while you can't use your copy ability, there's a few things you can suck up for offensive buffs, like the mic, which is a screen wipe, bombs that you can use for a blast wave, and the hyper lollipop. And for one last oddball note, you don't swim in this, you just kinda hop through water. If you're wondering, what's the difference? It just feels pretty weird, okay? While pretty bare bones for Kirby, you can definitely see the framework for what the series would become. There's a whole 5 levels in this one. First is Green Greens, and you wander around a forest, then through a tree. Next is Castle Lololo, where you wander through a building with a lot of doors. Some lead to extra rooms and dead ends, and some lead forward, with there being a few paths you can take to the end. Float Islands are a group of islands that you float across, as well as a cave and a ship that you travel over. Bubbly Clouds is a sky-based stage, with of course clouds, as well as what seems to be some sort of celestial palace. And Mount DDD is the final area, which has a sort of boss rush. There's a door for each of the previous bosses that you can do in any order. Entering one will contain a short section patterned after the stage you originally fought the boss in, and getting to the end and touching your doppelganger will clear out the Gordos and any other enemies to open the door to the boss fight. And as you can probably guess from my basic description, most of these areas are pretty basic. You travel to the right until you get to the end. Navigating Castle Lololo is probably the most complex, and I could see it being a little frustrating if your luck's so bad that you keep on choosing the wrong door, but it still doesn't take too much effort, even with process of elimination. And hey, as a Mega Man fan, I also like the boss rush, the little stage contained in each being a cute addition. Will say that I was initially confused, thinking that the copy Kirby at the end was some sort of enemy, but tagging that instead of just the key to open the way is definitely more interesting. I'm sure someone has a deep lore video on what these things actually are. Most stages also have 1 or 2 side paths that you can explore for some goodies, if you keep your eye out. And there's normally enough enemies and obstacles placed at all kinds of altitudes to prevent you from just mindlessly flying over everything. So while fairly simple, there definitely was some careful thought put into the layouts. Still, if you come into this one expecting a lot of stage gimmicks and crazy platforming, you'll likely be disappointed. But for those just looking for a fun romp, these will do the trick. You get a whole lot of mainstays when it comes to the enemies, like the Brunto Birds, Gordos, Scarfies, Kabu, and Waddle Dees, but there's also some that I haven't seen too often, or at all outside of this one, like the bats, the ones with the mummy bandages, and these guys floating around. Interesting to take note of which ones they kept and which ones they didn't. Each stage also has a sub-boss, which takes 3 hits, and a boss, which takes 6. First stage, you fight Poppy Brothers Sr., who chucks bombs and jumps around, and of course Wispy Woods. he spits 2 puffs of air your way, which you avoid by not actively jumping into them. Then drops apples which you can throw back at him. A gimme boss if I've ever seen one. Second stage has you fight Lo, who kicks blocks at you, then Lo and La at the same time, each getting half of a health bar, who try to run you over with blocks. This one's kind of interesting, since you need to maneuver around in a very limited space, and can choose between either being bold and facing them head on, or sneaking behind them to steal their block and try to nail them with it before they disappear. Also, didn't they get their own game on the NES? Third stage might actually not have a sub-boss, come to think of it, but at the end you fight a blimp with a cannon, that you face by using a power-up that keeps you constantly flying while letting you fire rapid blasts of air, of which it takes a few to knock out a block of its health. This was really hard for me initially because I'd get fairly close to it to make sure that my shots hit, but they still travel far enough even if you hang back, which makes the fight a lot more manageable. Still, changing the game genre for 30 seconds can throw you for a loop. Next is Kracko, who first appears as an eyeball, floating around and throwing a few projectiles your way, before turning into their full spiky cloud glory at the end of the stage. This fight feels a bit more RNG based than the rest, them having a few different movement options, a lightning attack, and of course, like their previous form, enemies they can pop out at you that you can throw back. Sometimes they'll just move slowly back and forth, giving you waddle-doos in between. Other times, they'll charge around aggressively while refusing to give you a chance to counter. Heck, sometimes they'll even pull the nasty move where they drop an enemy and while you're busy sucking them up, dash right into you. Not saying I hate the fight, just that your experience can vary based on Kracko's mood. Finally, after a boss rush, you have King Dedede. He can charge you, suck you up, swing his hammer, and leap up to slam into the floor. About half of his attack options put out stars you can send back, so unlike Kracko, you get a reliable amount of chances to fight back. The only thing that makes him harder than some of the other bosses is that unlike the rest, who have 6 HP, putting you on even ground, he's got 10, so you need to work a bit harder to take him out. Not a bad little menagerie of enemies, and the bosses are fun and interesting enough to make you look forward to the end of a stage. Except for Wispy Woods. This might be a weird thing to ask of a guy rooted into the ground, but why did you even bother showing up? It's Gameboy, so say it with me. You can have the graphics be green, gray, or in color. If you go with the last option, characters will appear in red and pink hues, whereas most of the environments show up as yellow, green, white, or black. And I'm not really sure what to say beyond that. With the weaker hardware and smaller screen, you definitely can't expect things to look as good as they would on the Nintendo, but at the same time, with how well things translated graphically for Mega Man, I guess there's a part of me that wishes they were a bit more comparable. Then again, I've certainly seen worse looking Game Boy games, and given how limited the system was, it feels dumb to criticize any of them in any situation. So I guess that what I'll say is, you can definitely tell what system this was for, even if you are playing in color, and in that arena, it's not the best looking, but it's not the worst looking either. Let's move on to some other visual aspects instead. The little cutscenes in between levels are always welcome. While not necessary, it gives Kirby a little more personality and makes you more attached to him, which is great since there's not much storytelling outside of that. I also find the color palette kind of interesting, since on the box, Kirby is more of an off-white color. Watched a video of some people visiting the Nintendo Museum recently who were surprised seeing the art and questioned if he wasn't actually a Boo. Then the Game Boy Color makes him pink, which seems almost too perfect. Mega Man got stuck being a peachy shade of orange instead of his standard blue. I started wondering if maybe he was originally grayish-white to match the Game Boy Pocket, then the color made him pink and they decided they liked that better, but a quick search informed me that, nope, he was always meant to be pink. The original box art was just to match the console, though what a nice coincidence that the next handheld gave him his intended coloration. Unless this was a custom job for NSO. The music is cute and pretty peppy. There's quite a few tracks that will be familiar to people who have played the other games, or even just Smash, like Green Green's and Dedede's theme. They're much simpler here due to the hardware, but it's still interesting to hear their origin and compare them to their later iterations. Some of these have come a long way. Even just here though, the music's pleasant to listen to and keeps things light, which works well for such a bite-sized experience. Most of the sound effects match up to what you'd hear in the NES sequel, Kirby's Adventure, and even some of the games after that. Kirby still sounds exactly how you'd expect as he hops and flies around, consuming and upchucking enemies. About the only one that seems a bit off is the noise for impact, which feels weak, but that's so minor that it feels like I'm nitpicking, even bringing it up in passing. While nothing too crazy, the sound is enjoyable and does what it needs to do. Kirby games tend to be pretty easy, and this is no exception. Heck, post-game or 100%ing them tend to be the big challenge. But this game is so straightforward that it doesn't even have that. A few things that can make the game a little trickier are the smaller screen, there's a few times rushing forward where I would get sucker punched, and the limited color palette making it hard to tell background from foreground. I'd also call a few of the bosses a medium challenge, and the health refills and extra lives are pretty sparse, but with as short as the levels are, the game isn't exactly an endurance test anyway. I can clear it in 20 some minutes, and the average playtime is 46, and I'd say that's pretty reliable. Now, there is a harder difficulty you can unlock with a code, and that is a decent challenge. The enemies are a lot faster, more aggressive, and some even do 2 bits of health at a time. And there's also some sneakier traps. I had to completely change my thinking when it came to the game and play it a lot more carefully, sometimes even memorizing where some enemies were. Then I started noticing some other things, like some hitboxes don't seem consistent, and there were quite a few times where it didn't feel like I could move Kirby fast enough to react to things. But if you get through it, you get a bonus credits that shows and names all the enemies, as well as a code for the config mode, so it's all worth it. It's a little frustrating that the base game is so easy that you can basically play it brain dead, but hard mode had me legitimately getting angry. Made me really wish there was a setting in between, but hey, like most things, repetition does make things easier. My second hard run, I got through it a lot quicker without even a game over. Sure, I may have been using the code to start off with 9 lives, but I earned it, damn it. Kirby's Dream Land is the sort of game that, if I were an adult buying it new, I would feel incredibly ripped off. While I know I'm the sort to say that game length shouldn't factor into price, there are limits, and under a half hour might be it. It doesn't even have the difficulty other games of a similar size have to artificially drag things out. It's also not the sort of thing you're likely going to want to play over and over again either. While it might have a few secrets and a second difficulty, for the most part, when you clear it once, you've pretty much seen all it has to offer. It's definitely the simplest entry in the series in pretty much every way possible. At the same time though, if you're able to play it without the trip to Toys R Us, it's fun enough to be worth a run through, and it'll be interesting for fans to learn the origins of some of the elements and see how far things have come, even just by comparing it to the next entry. I also think it'd be great as a child's first platformer. Those fine motor skills can be hard starting out, but Kirby's Dream Land is forgiving enough and short enough that, while they might not get it immediately, is the sort that's perfect for building up those little movements and eventually work up to a clear, before moving on to something a little more complex. So while I might have told you to save your money back in 1992, these days, with it being easily available on NSO, it's a pretty easy recommend. But what about you? Did this one slip through the cracks, or have you actually played it? And if so, what did you think? Am I being too harsh on it and not giving it enough credit? The further back I go, the sillier I feel expecting too much from anything on such limited hardware, but at the same time, there's a lot of other stuff people could be playing. With that, thanks for watching, and maybe consider subscribing if you're into platformers, especially Mega Man, which is what I normally do. Right back at ya! Yeah!